Okay, today I'm going to discuss about the overview of ICH GCP guidelines and IRB, Institutional Review Board or Institutional Ethics Committee and its responsibilities, and also the informed consent documentation and also the process of the informed consent. Okay, so let us start with the overview of ICH GCP guidelines. See, generally every clinical research, okay, any clinical research or any medical research, and even the production of the pharma, or even the production process on the pharma or biotech company, okay, so they have to uh, follow some of the guidelines which are being prescribed by the International Conference of Harmonization. Okay, so generally the ICH, okay, ICH, which we can also discuss it as an international conference of harmonization. Okay, so the first international conference of harmonization took place in Brussels, Belgium, in the year 1990. Okay, in the year 1990, this was first took place in Brussels, Belgium. So generally, it consisted of representatives from industry, from academia, and from the various ministries of health throughout the world. Okay, the three regions that participated were the United States, the European Union, and Japan. The key objective or mission of the International Conference on Harmonization was to discuss and define the minimum standards for the development and the registration of investigational products. Okay, many deliverables. Okay, many deliverables resulted from this initiative or this mission. One of them was the development of the ICH GCP guideline. Okay, one of them was the development of ICH GCP guideline. The first draft. Okay, the first draft was presented at International Conference of Harmonization in the year 1990 itself. Okay, and is referred to as a step 1. Okay, and subsequent versions are referred to as step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5. So step 4 was the final draft version. Step 4 was the final draft version that was presented or recommended for approval in each of the three regions in the year 1996. Okay. Step 5 is the current version of the ICH GCP guideline, which has been finalized and implemented. Okay. The step 5 version is dated on January 1997. Okay, in the January 1997, it was being dated. So generally, individuals from United States, the European Union, and Japan had numerous questions related to the implementation of the final ICH GCP guidelines. Okay, consequently, a note for guidelines, okay, or a note for guidance, okay, consequently, a note for guidance or an addendum, okay, or an addendum to the January 97 version, okay, or step 5 version, okay, to the January 1997 version or step 5 version was issued, okay, was issued. The note for guidance was issued on September 8, 1997. Okay, September 8, 1997. So, as per the note for guidance, okay, as per the note for guidance, which was issued on September 8, 1997. So, the ICH GCP guidelines consist of, okay, it contains 8 sections. Okay, it contains 8 sections. The 8 sections are divided as first one is glossary, okay, which is also called as section 1. Section 1 consists of a glossary, and the glossary is a very important section of the ICH GCP guideline, okay, because it is the first time in the history that a common language is developed for investigators, okay, that a common language was developed for investigators, sponsors, and ethics committees, okay, to use in the implementation of a clinical trial, okay, to use in the implementation of a clinical trial. Okay. Then section 2 is entitled as Principles of Good Clinical Practices, and it presents the 13 tenets of the ICH GCP. And section 3 consists of the requirements for IRB, that is Institutional Review Board, as they are referred to in the United States and Canada, and independent ethics committees as they are referred to outside the US and Canada. Okay, so this section outlines the roles, responsibilities, and the composition of Institutional Review Board. Okay, so basically in United States and in Canada, it was referred as IRB. Okay, IRB, whereas in the rest of the world, okay, rest of the world, it was called as an Independent Ethics Committee. Okay, IEC. So section 4. So section 4 outlines the responsibilities of investigators in the conduct of clinical research. Okay? And section 5 outlines the responsibilities of the sponsor. And section 6 consists of the requirements for a clinical trial protocol in associated to protocol amendments. Okay, so clinical trial protocol is nothing but it is a study plan with which the clinical trial has to be conducted, and protocol amendments are nothing but a changes which are made it to the protocol is called as protocol amendments. Okay, a changes which are made to the protocol is called as protocol amendments. And next, and section 7 outlines the responsibilities of the sponsor in the development of an investigator brochure. The owner of the investigator brochure is generally the sponsor only. Okay? The owner of the investigator brochure is generally the sponsor. The investigator brochure is a very important document that is provided to the investigator, and in most instances to the IRB, that is institutional review boards or independent ethics committees, prior to the approval of a clinical study or a clinical protocol. The investigator's brochure contains all of the preclinical and clinical safety information that is available on the investigational product. Okay. And next is section 8, which is entitled as essential documents. So it is a key component of the ICH GCP guideline and is divided into two groups. Part 1 outlines the essential documents that is required before, during, and after a clinical trial is completed for the investigator, and the essential documents that are required for the sponsor. Okay, and part 2 is nothing but essential document that are required for the sponsor, and the part 1 is nothing but the essential document that are required before, during, and after a clinical trial is completed for the investigator. Okay, so in these, okay, the ICH GCP, under the ICH GCP, it contains 13 basic principles. Okay, ICH GCP, that is section 2. Okay, principles of good clinical practices. It contains 13 basic principles. Okay, so all the principles are based on the Declaration of Helsinki only. Okay, all the principles are based on the Declaration of Helsinki. So as we see the first principle, okay, the first principle indicates that the clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with ethical principles, that are the values, okay, conducted in accordance with ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki, that are consistent with good clinical practices and local regulatory requirements. Okay, so whatever clinical trials which were conducted should be in accordance with the ethical principles which were declared by the Helsinki. So the Declaration of Helsinki will be reviewed in the next classes. Okay. And the second principle, it states that before a trial is initiated, so foreseeable risks and inconveniences should be weighed against the anticipated benefit for the individual trial subject and society. A trial should only be initiated and continued if the anticipated benefits justify the risks. Okay, so the risks and the benefits should be weighed over here as per the second principle. Okay, so it should be equally important. The risk should be risks as well as the benefits, that is efficacy, should be equally important as part for the individual trial subjects or for the society. Okay, and the third principle of the good clinical practices states that rights, the safety, and the well-being of the trial subjects are the most important considerations and should prevail over interest of society and science. Okay, prevail over interest of society as well as science. And then when we look over the fourth principle, so the fourth principle, it states that the available preclinical and clinical information on an investigational product should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. That is, we have to submit the preclinical and clinical information of a product, okay, of the NCE, new chemical entity, in the form of IND document, which is called as investigational new drug document. Okay, and the fifth principle states that clinical trials should be scientifically sound. Okay, should be scientifically sound and described in a clearly detailed protocol. The requirements for the protocol for the clinical trial are also should be outlined in the ICH GCP guidelines. Okay, and also the sixth principle, it states that a trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol. Okay? The trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received prior to IRB or IEC approval. Okay, IRB is nothing but Institutional Review Board, and IEC is nothing but Independent Ethics Committee. Okay, so prior to IRB or IEC approval or favorable opinion. Okay, this means that a clinical trial should not be initiated unless prior Institutional Review Board or Independent Ethics Committee approval is obtained. Okay, is obtained. And the seventh principle, it states that the medical care, okay, the medical care which is given to and medical decisions made on behalf of subjects should always be responsibility of a qualified physician or, when appropriate, a qualified dentist. Essentially, what this means is that independent of who is the principal investigator in a clinical trial, okay, who is a principal investigator in a clinical trial, the person or people responsible for providing medical care to the subject should always be a qualified physician. Okay. And the eighth principle, it states that each individual involved in conducting a clinical trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective tasks. So generally, it is usually the responsibility of the sponsor to ensure that all the individuals involved in the clinical trial are indeed qualified by education, training, and experiences. Okay, and this is often done by a pre-study visit, pre-study site visit, to meet and interview the staff to ensure that they are indeed qualified, and also by reviewing the curriculum vitae or CV for the staff involved in the clinical trial. Okay, for the staff involved in the clinical trial. And then, if you see the ninth principle, it states that freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to clinical trial participation. See, it is very important to note in this point that voluntary informed consent should always be obtained prior to the clinical trial, and the subject must not be screened or enrolled in the clinical trial unless voluntary informed consent is obtained. Okay, unless the voluntary informed consent is obtained. And the 10th principle, it states that all clinical trial information should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. Okay, and then if you check out the 11th principle, generally it states that the confidentiality of the records. Okay, the confidential records that should identify the subject should be protected. Okay, that should be protected. And then the 12th principle. Okay, the 12th principle of good clinical states that the investigational product should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with applicable good manufacturing practices. Okay, with good manufacturing practices. Good manufacturing practices, or GMP, have been in place for a much longer period of time than GCP, and many countries, okay, many countries throughout the world had GMPs, good manufacturing practices requirements, in place for the manufacturing and the handling of investigational products. Okay, and the handling of the investigational products. The investigational products used in the clinical trial should be used in accordance with the approved protocol only. Okay, in accordance with the approved protocol. In the protocol, there is a section that makes reference to the detailed instruction for the handling and storage of the investigational product that is used in a clinical trial. Okay, that is used in a clinical trial. And when we check out the 13th principle, the 13th principle of the GCP, Good Clinical Practices, it states that the systems and procedures that ensure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented, which is generally the responsibility of the sponsor only. Okay, which is generally the responsibility of the sponsor only. So although it has been through various revisions, the most current version in the is the version dated January 17, 1997, okay, which is including an addendum entitled that Note for Guidance, which is dated on September 8, 1997. Okay, September 8, 1997, and this is the GCP outline. Okay, this is only the GCP outlines. Okay, and if we go in depth of the IRBs, okay, or ethics committees, okay, IRB or ethics committees. So generally, IRB and ethics committee is it comes as a section 3, right? It comes as a section 3 of the GCP, which is nothing but a institutional review board. Okay, so when we look after the IRB of the GCP sections, okay, so which is called as the institutional review board or independent ethics committee. So institutional review board will be called the ethics committee in the form of initial review board will be called in US as well as in Canada, whereas throughout the in the other than US and Canada, we call it as an independent ethics committee. Okay. So this is an important. Okay, it is important to recognize that much of the historical basis of ethical investigation comes from corrections of transgressions that were made by us as investigators, okay, historically. Okay, so much of this comes from the time of the Nazi war crimes, okay, Nazi war crimes, the Nuremberg trials, and ultimately the development of the Declaration of Helsinki to establish a standard for clinical investigation and the ethics of clinical investigation worldwide. Okay, so these standards, okay, these standards continue to evolve. One of the great challenges we face is to be involved in the process and examine the problems and try to create solutions that will protect our patients as potential subjects in human trials. Okay, as potential subjects in human trials. Okay, so one of the outcomes, okay, one of the outcomes of the Declaration of Helsinki was the realization that research involving humans must conform to accepted scientific standards, okay, scientific standards, and should be based on well-performed laboratory and animal experiments. Okay, this means that not every idea is appropriate for translation into a human study. We need to look into the scientific basis of our ideas and confirm that, in fact, they are valid scientifically before we begin to design a clinical trial and expose humans to potential risks from that clinical trial. Okay, from that clinical trial. And then one of the safeguards established by the Declaration of Helsinki was that the protocols for research on humans, okay, protocols for research on humans need to be reviewed by an appropriate and independent committee, which has been called as the IRB or IEC, that is Institutional Review Board or Independent Ethics Committee, for consideration, comment, and guidance for the scientific process. Okay, so research on human subjects should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons, and the responsibility for the subject always rests with the medically qualified staff personnel. Okay, medically qualified staff personnel. So what this means, okay, is that the principal investigator of the trial, okay, the principal investigator of the trial bears ultimate responsibility for the recruitment, for the conduct of the trial on subjects, okay, for the conduct of the trial on subjects, for the analysis of data, and ultimately for the transfer of that data to either a sponsor or for the publication of the data in the medical literature. Okay, the rights of the subjects safeguard, okay, the rights of the subject safeguarding his or her integrity must be respected. Okay, must be completely respected. Okay, and this lies at the center of all human investigations. Okay, this lies at the center of all human investigation, and we have to realize that research should be avoided if the hazards are not believed. Okay, if the hazards are not believed to be predictable, and research should cease. Okay, research should cease if the hazards are found to overweigh the benefit. Okay, if unexpected side effects occur within the context of the clinical trial, those side effects have to be recognized, discussed, and the trial potentially stopped to avoid side effects from occurring in additional subjects. Okay, in the additional subjects. So the researcher, okay, the researcher must preserve the accuracy of the results of any publication, okay, of any publication, and the experiments not in accordance with the guidelines of appropriate ethical behavior should not be published. Okay, currently almost all medical journals, okay, currently almost all the medical journals require that an assurance that a protocol has been reviewed and approved by the Independent Ethics Committee or IRB be provided to them prior to their consideration of a manuscript for publication. This is yet again another safeguard to make sure that subjects are appropriately treated within the context of clinical trials on humans. Okay, so in human experimentation again, okay, in human experimentation, the importance of the objective must be in proportion to the inherent risk to the subject, okay, inherent risk to the subject. Okay, this brings up the concept of risk and benefit ratio, okay, which of course should always favor benefit over risk, okay, should always favor benefit over risk. So every trial requires careful assessment of the predictable risks compared to the foreseeable benefits to the subject. So we recognize that some risks are unpredictable, okay, some risks are unpredictable, and when these occur, it must bring into consideration changing a protocol or stopping a protocol because of unrealistic and unreasonable risks. Okay. Importantly, concern for the subject, okay, concern for the subject must prevail over the interest of science and society. Okay. So we are going to turn back to this concept again over the next in the next uh, reviews. Okay. So there are some general principles, okay, there are some general principles that were defined by the Declaration of Helsinki, okay, that were defined by the Declaration of Helsinki, that define an institutional review board or independent ethics committee as a critical and a necessary component from both a legal and ethical perspective of human investigation. Okay, in fact, the goals of the IRB, okay, in fact, the goals of the IRB or IEC, Independent Ethics Committee, are to protect the rights of subjects, protect the rights of investigators, and protect the rights of sponsors, and protect the rights of sponsoring institutions. Okay, protect the rights of subjects, protect the rights of investigators, protect the rights of sponsors, and protect the rights of sponsoring institutions. See, when an IRB is functioning properly, okay, when an IRB is functioning properly, the rights of all of these groups, okay, are indeed protected, okay, that we can feel more comfortable about the conduct of the clinical trial in humans, okay, in humans. So any protocol approved by an IRB or independent ethics committee will guarantee that the research activities proposed, okay, the research activities proposed minimize the potential risks to the human subjects, okay, minimize the potential risk to the human subjects. So again, the concept of risk and benefit ratio, okay, if the risk is low, then the benefit may be even greater, okay, if the risk is low, then the benefit may be even greater. So the risks to the subject must be reasonable in relation to the anticipated benefit, okay, in relation to the anticipated benefit. Once again, the risk benefit ratio, and to the importance and significance of the scientific knowledge potentially gained with the research. Indeed, the determination of the appropriateness of the trial depends on the value of the findings from the trial to the population as a whole, and not to the specific individual under the trial, okay, individual under the trial. So this is an important, okay, so this is an important paradox or apparent paradox, because on the one hand we involve individual subjects, okay, on the one hand we involve individual subjects, okay, in the trial, okay, individual subject in the trial, and we try to assure their safety, we protect their rights. On the other hand, we conduct clinical trials not for the benefit to the individual subject who is enrolled, but rather to the benefit of the population and to society as a whole, right, the population and the society as a whole. Okay, so an IRB, okay, an IRB must assure that the selection of subjects is equitable. Okay, this means that women and minorities are included in trial population, so that all persons share both the benefits and burdens of research. Okay, burdens of research. There is another important aspect of involving different types of subjects in research, and that refers to the ability to generate the results to the population as a whole. Something generally we can discuss the segment on the biostatistics and human investigations. Okay, so the IRB, okay, the IRB generally it issues that effective written informed consent, okay, effective written informed consent is obtained and documented, okay, is obtained and documented, and the informed consent, however, is not just a signature on a piece of paper, okay, is not just a signature on a piece of paper. Informed consent is a process, okay? It is a process that involves the education of the subject and the assent of that subject to participate, and not only to enter a trial, but also for the continued conduct of the trial, okay? But also for the continued conduct of the trial. And informed consent, generally it underlines, okay, it underlies all the human investigations that we perform, okay, all the human investigations that we perform. So generally some general principles include that there are adequate provisions to protect the privacy of subjects and to maintain the confidentiality of data also, okay, to maintain the confidentiality of data. So data, okay, while confidential, needs to be reviewed by sponsors or regulatory agencies, or either during the trial itself or after data are actually submitted to the regulatory agency for consideration of approval, right? And it is important that subjects, okay, it is important that subjects understand the rights of the sponsor and the regulatory agency, okay, understand the rights of the subject, sponsor and the regulatory agency to review their specific data, but also to understand that their data are not to be available to the general public, okay, not to be available to the general public. And importantly, the IRB and the protocol, okay, IRB and the protocol must assure that there are appropriate safeguards to protect potentially vulnerable populations. Some examples of vulnerable populations include pregnant women, okay, unborn fetuses, children, mentally disabled, and the acutely ill who may not be able to give the usual types of informed consents, or unconscious individuals, or individuals with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, okay, and a whole group of other subjects including prisoners and members of the armed forces, okay, and the members of the armed forces. It is critically important, okay, that these groups, okay, it is critically important that these groups that might be considered potential subjects for clinical trial be safeguarded through appropriate documentation and review of the ethics of their inclusion in a clinical trial, okay, in a clinical trial. So now the IRB or IAC also elucidates the obligations of the investigator, okay, obligations of the investigator. For us, okay, for all of us, okay, for all of us, as we are moving into clinical investigators or clinical investigation, okay. So it is important to recognize that clinical trial research, or clinical trial research, is really a partnership between the investigator and the subjects, okay. Clinical trial research is really a partnership between the investigator and the subject. So the rights of both parties, okay, the rights of both parties must be clearly defined and respected, okay, must be clearly defined and respected. So generally, as we have already discussed, okay, the trial must be designed to minimize the risks and stress of participating subjects to the greatest degree possible, okay, to the greatest degree possible, okay. Provisions also must be made to assure the overall care of the subject, both within the context of that specific trial, but also if any untoward events occur during the trial and continue after a trial is completed or a subject is discontinued from the trial, okay. So ultimately, okay, ultimately the investigator, okay, ultimately the investigator bears responsibility for terminating a trial, okay, bears responsibility for terminating a trial when the risks to the subject, okay, when the risks to the subject become apparent or maybe incompatible, okay, incompatible with the benefits of the trial. So many large clinical trials employ data safety monitoring boards generally, okay, to do this. Many large clinical trials like quintiles, okay, or weight, okay. Mostly they employ a large clinical trial employ data safety monitoring boards that are constantly reviewing the data to look for side effects or untoward outcomes during the conduct of the trial, okay, during the conduct of the trial. They have the authority, okay, they have the authority to actually bring a half to the trial that is still underway, okay. It is the responsibility of the investigator to identify the side effects and report them both to the IRB and IAC, okay, both to the IRB and IAC, and also to the sponsor of the trial, okay, and in certain circumstances directly to the regulatory agencies, okay, and in certain circumstances directly the investigator has to report directly to the regulatory agencies like OHRP, Office of Human Rights Protection, or FDA, okay, or FDA. And then if we check out the IRB or IAC, okay, structured membership. So the IRB is generally considered to consist of at least 5 members, okay, and at least of 5 members, and this is prescribed by current ICH, that is International Commission on Harmonization, Conference of Harmonization, ICH GCP Guidelines. Okay, most members are often appropriate depending upon the particular type of research being done within a given institution. Okay, and it is important that the committee consists of members of different backgrounds. Okay, members of different backgrounds, and there should be sufficient scientific expertise. Okay, there should be sufficient scientific expertise to adequately review the range of research activities. To adequately review the range of research activities that are commonly conducted in a clinical trial. Okay, the membership should consist of the members of both the genders. Okay, should consist of the members of both the genders, and should consist of a diversity of racial and cultural backgrounds of the community that's being served. Okay, so this of course helps in the recruitment of subjects who also are representative for both genders and different ethnic and racial backgrounds. Okay, and it's important to point out that not every country requires this diversity. Okay, this diversity. So if a study is performed, however, under the United States in IND application or in investigational new drug application, a trial that is used for drug registration, then the diversity becomes a requirement for the trial, okay, to be considered or accepted for the review by the regulatory agency. Okay, regulatory agency. Okay, at least, okay, at least one member, okay, at least one member on the committee, okay, at least one member on the committee should be someone whose primary expertise is in a scientific area. So you may recall from earlier discussions the need to have a scientifically valid approach before the study becomes ethical. Okay, before the study becomes ethical. So the member of the committee who understands science is the one who really is able to determine the appropriateness of risk-benefit ratio around scientific issues. So at least one member of the committee, okay, at least one member of the committee should have primary expertise in a non-scientific area also, okay, in a non-scientific area, so that we can discuss it shortly. Okay, so importantly, one member of the scientific committee, okay, or one member of a committee, IRB or IEC committee, should not be employed, okay, should not be employed by the institution or otherwise affiliated with the institutional aspect. Okay, affiliation with the institutional aspect, of course, okay, of course, for their participation on the IRB itself. Okay, so a need may arise for additional members who have expertise in areas of special consideration for research at the institution. Okay, so these might include members of the clergy and attorney, a social worker, or a lay individual who represent the cultural backgrounds. Okay, who represent the cultural background of the particular community in which the research is being conducted. Okay, in which the research is being conducted. Okay, so generally no members of the committee may have a conflict of interest, okay, on either initial or continuing review of protocols and projects, because this creates a major conflict for both the institution and the individual. Okay, for both the institution as well as individual. So generally it is appropriate, however, for someone who has specific knowledge about a protocol, okay, for someone who has specific knowledge about a protocol, to approve the expert testimony to the IRB about that protocol. Okay, about that protocol. So at times, okay, at times the IRB or a IEC may at its discretion invite individuals with competence in specific special areas to assist them in the review of issues which require expertise beyond or in addition to the available among the IRB members also, okay, available among the IRB members. So these consulting experts provide in the process by approving or by providing information, but they do not vote with the IRB concerning approval or disapproval of an individual project. Okay, disapproval of the individual project. Then what about, okay, then What about the responsibility of the IRB for research conducted in the institution? Okay, research conducted. So the IRB generally holds the seat of power, okay, the seat of power around ethical issues and human investigation. Okay, a seat of power around ethical issues and human investigation. So they review and have the authority to approve require modifications, okay, require modifications. So that is to secure approval, okay, that is to secure approval, and or disapprove all research activities covered by the research policy of the institution concerning the clinical investigations, okay, concerning the clinical investigations. So the IRB will approve or require modifications to gain approval of written information conveyed to the potential research subject in the form of the informed consent document, which is a written document of informed consent is required for all the research subjects, and a copy must be given to the research subjects unless that requirement is specifically waived by the committee because of trivial risks, okay, because of the trivial risk to the subject from the protocol. So generally an example that this might be an extra blood test, okay, extra blood test performed on a sample already obtained from a subject, okay, particularly when that subject remains anonymous or data from that subject remains anonymous, okay, within the context of the clinical trial, okay, within the context of the clinical trial. So an IRB, okay, an IRB also has the responsibility to notify investigators and the institution in writing of its decisions, okay, institution in writing of its decision to approve or disapprove the proposed research activity or modification required to secure approval by the committee for research activity, okay. So minor modifications to the protocol may be subject to an expedited or administrative review by the committee, okay, expedited or administrative review by the committee. So the committee decisions, okay, the committee decisions concerning modifications must be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, and the written minutes must be taken at all IRB meetings and held for a long term in the possession of the institution, okay, in the possession of the institution, okay. If the IRB, okay, if the IRB decides to disapprove, okay, to disapprove a research activity, if the IRB or IAC decides to disapprove a research activity, it is required to notify the investigator is in return of the reasons for its decision, and then it has to give the investigator an opportunity to respond either in person or in return with additional information that may convince the IRB to approve a currently disapproved protocol, okay, currently disapproved protocol. The IRB needs also to conduct continuing review of research under its jurisdiction at intervals which are appropriate to the degree of risk, okay, which is appropriate to the degree of risk conferred by the particular protocol, but certainly not less than once yearly, okay, but certainly not less than once yearly. So this requires written reports from the investigator on the progress and adverse events, okay, adverse drug reactions, okay, associated with a particular protocol. This is compulsory, okay. And the IRB also has the authority to observe or to have a third party observe the consent process and the actual conduct of the research to assure itself that the research is being conducted as originally written in the protocol submitted to the IRB, okay, protocol submitted to the IRB. And then what does the investigator need to know about the IRB, okay, what does the investigator needs to know about the IRB? So the first thing, of course, is the name and address of the office of the chairman of the committee at his or her particular research facility or institution, okay, this is the first thing. And this is to facilitate contact with the committee and submission of appropriate information, okay, submission of appropriate information. The investigator also needs to know the meeting schedule for the IRB so that he or she can submit protocols in a timely fashion for review, okay. And it is also the responsibility of the IRB to review the protocols, okay, to review the protocols expediently and to provide a written opinion to the investigator as to the approval or disapproval or need for modifications for a particular research project. Okay, the investigator is required to submit documents to the ethics committee according to the specific guidelines determined by that committee. Okay, determined by that committee. And thus every protocol, okay, every protocol submitted to an IRB, okay, should be in a same form, and this facilitates review by the committee members and speeds the process of deliberation. Okay, the investigator also needs to have available a list of members of the committee, okay, list of members of the committee and their background and the statement of the committee's compliance with the GCP guidelines delineated by the International Conference on Harmonization. Okay, so this is a requirement for pharmaceutical sponsors of clinical research trials. Okay, pharmaceutical sponsors of clinical research trials. So, in summary, okay, so in summary, see, we have looked at what makes up an IRB and how it functions. Okay, the IRB serves as an essential element for human investigation, right? For a human investigation. In order to safeguard subjects, investigators, sponsors, and institutions, and to assure that trials are carried out under the very highest ethical standards, okay, very highest ethical standards. In addition to this, however, the IRB also serves as a forum for discussions involving issues concerning the ethics of human investigations. Okay, ethics of human investigation. So generally, new issues are constantly arising, and we are facing with a deliberation of the value of the scientific science versus the risk of new treatments, or the conduct of clinical research where the unknown sometimes outweigh the knowns. Okay, so unknown sometimes outweigh the knowns. Okay, so examples, generally if we check out the examples of this might include genetics research and gene therapy. Okay, genetics research and gene therapy, a very prominent topic of research, okay, in the United States over the last decade. Okay, issues of research on children or other disadvantaged subjects are as yet still unresolved. Okay, particularly in some countries and some within the purview of individual IRBs that represent the ethical positions of the institutions that they represent. Okay, the whole concept of placebo versus active control trial is another controversial issue. Okay, the issue have been highlighted in the most recent revision of the Declaration of Helsinki, where it has been proposed that placebo studies are no longer ethical. Finally, the application of new technologies to clinical research and ultimately to clinical care are often discussed in the society right now. Okay, within the context of clinical trials, however, they are first discussed within the confines of the meeting room of the Independent Ethics Committee. IRB play an important role in the conduct of the human investigation. They vet the ethics of human investigation, and they weigh the value of the science to the benefits that may derive from new drugs. Okay, that may derive from new drugs and new therapies. Okay, and the risks that those therapies and drugs may impose on a population. Okay, may impose on a population. So this is an IRB and IEC roles and responsibilities, and how this has to be taken up by the investigator or a sponsor. Okay, and then in the GCP section, okay, under the GCP section, so the fourth section is about informed consents. Okay, informed consents. So who are informed consents? Informed consent nothing but a participants or a subjects who are recruiting into the trial or a clinical trial. Okay, so generally in this section we can review the informed consent into 5 aspects: definition, process, special situation, elements of informed consent, and retentions of the things. Okay, so generally if we check out the definitions, okay, so the definition that we follow when talking about informed consent becomes from the International Conference on Harmonization, ICH. Okay, so informed consent in these documents is defined as a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after being or after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. Okay, so generally I can underline 2 words in this. Okay, process and voluntary. okay, process as well as voluntarily. So generally, informed consent is documented, okay, by means of a written, signed and dated, okay, by means of a written, signed and dated informed consent form. Okay, process is as important or more important than the documentation. Okay, but both the elements need to be present. But both the elements need to be present. Okay, so in obtaining and documenting informed consent, okay, in obtaining and documenting the informed consent, the investigator should comply with the applicable regulatory requirements. Okay, regulatory requirements. The investigator should also adhere to good clinical practices and to the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. Okay, origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. And prior to the beginning of the trial, okay, prior to the beginning of the trial, the investigator must obtain from the IRB, okay, or Institutional Review Board, a written approval and favorable opinion of the written informed consent form, and any other written information to be provided to the subject. Okay, so this is not a one-time event. Okay, this is not a one-time event. So in the conduct of clinical research, new information frequently becomes available that is relevant. Okay? Available that is relevant. Accordingly, revisions to the informed consent will need to be submitted to the IRB for reapproval. Okay, for reapproval, and then taken once, once they are approved to the subject of reconsenting. Okay, reconsenting. So the intentions. Okay, the intention of the informed consent process. Okay, the intention of the informed consent process is to transmit study information from the investigator to the subject or his or her legal representative. Okay, it requires that the subject clearly understands the risks. Okay, it requires that the subject clearly understands the risk, the alternative treatments, the potential benefits, the obligations as a subject, and that the study involves research. Okay, that the study involves research. So it must be emphasized that reading and signing the consent form does not assure comprehension, and to provide the information necessary to assure comprehension to a major responsibility and the investigator and the investigator's research team. Okay, and the investigator's research team. And the subject must be treated as an autonomous agent. Okay, subject must be treated as an autonomous agent. The subject must be allowed to make a voluntary decision without coercion, and the consent must be obtained prior to any study related procedures. Okay, prior to any study related procedures. The consent should not contain any language. Okay, the consent should not contain any language waiving the subject's legal rights. Okay, so adequate information must be provided here. Okay, adequate information must be provided. One must also provide an opportunity for this subject to consider options and ask questions. Okay, and ask, that is, we have to interview the subject. The individual administering of the current consent process. Okay, the individual administering the consent process must be assured that the individual that is being asked, okay, comprehends what is going on. Okay, comprehends what is going on. So the clinical investigator must obtain voluntary agreement and must supply ongoing information. Okay, must supply an ongoing information. So generally, the final step in the documentation of the subject's agreement to participate, the consent form must be approved by the IRB. Okay, must be approved by the IRB, and the investigator is ultimately responsible for obtaining the consent. Okay, although this is a central tenet in this process. Okay, the investigator may not be the person responsible for obtaining the consent form, consent from an individual, and the document does not need to be witnessed by the investigator. Okay, the document does, however, need to be witnessed by the person who conducted the discussion. Okay, who conducted the discussion. So, of great importance, okay, particularly in the era where emphasis is placed on conducting studies with people of different origins. Okay, people on different origins or backgrounds. Okay, backgrounds. and nationalities, okay, and all oral and written information, okay, all oral and written must be understandable to the subject, okay, must be understandable to the subject. So information must be provided in a language, okay, information must be provided in language in which the subject is fluent, okay, in which the subject is fluent. Medical terms, okay, medical terms must be clearly explained in language that is understandable to non-medical individuals, okay, non-medical individuals. The subject will be provided a copy of the consent form, okay, the subject will be provided a copy of the consent form. As previously mentioned, if amendments of the consent form is necessary, it needs to be approved by the IRB and then re-signed by all ongoing subjects, okay, re-signed by an all ongoing subject. And there may be some special situations also, okay, trials that have no anticipated direct clinical benefit for the subject should be conducted in subjects who can personally give consent and who can sign and date, okay, who can sign and date the written informed consent form, okay. So trials which have no anticipated direct clinical benefits may be conducted, okay, may be conducted in a subject with the consent of legally acceptable representative, provided the objective of the trial cannot be met by means of a trial in the subject who can give informed consent personally, okay. So additionally, the risks to the subject must be very low, okay, the risks to the subject must be very low. The negative impact must be minimal. The trial must not be prohibited by the law, and perhaps the most important is the IRB has given written approval and the favorable opinion of the trial, okay, favorable opinion of the trial. So in an emergency situation, okay, in an emergency situation, when prior consent of the subject is not possible, okay, the consent of a legally acceptable representative should be requested if one is available. If the legally acceptable representative is not available, the subject can still be enrolled if it is to the subject's best clinical interest, okay, best clinical interest. The subject and or the legally acceptable representative should be informed of the trial and sign a written informed consent form as soon as possible, okay, as soon as possible. When a subject can only be included in a trial with the consent of the representative, for example, if children or persons with severe mental disabilities, okay, mental disabilities or dementia are involved, okay, the subject still should be informed about the trial to the extent of his or her understanding, okay. If capable, the subject should sign and date the informed consent form, okay, should date the informed consent form. That's the most important over here. And if the subject or representative is unable to read, okay, or unable to read, an impartial witness should be present during the entire informed consent discussions, okay. After the subject has orally consented to the trial, or he or the representative have signed and dated the consent form, okay, the impartial witness then signs attesting that all trial information was clearly explained to the subject or representative, okay, attesting to, as the clearly explained to the subject or representative. So what we have emphasized here are a number of special situations in which obtaining informed consent is difficult, okay? Obtaining informed consent is difficult. So that does not mean that the concept of informed consent is not essential, okay? The concept of informed consent is not essential. What has been provided are alternative methods to ensure the autonomy of the individual, the voluntariness of the process of participating in the study, and the oversight necessary to ensure that the rights and privileges of the study subject are being protected, okay, should be protected, okay. So first of all, it should be clearly stated that trial involves research, okay, trial involves research, and the purpose of this trial should be outlined. The purpose of the trial should be outlined, and the possibility of random assignment and the trial procedures that will be necessary, okay, that will be necessary, including follow-up visits, okay, including follow-up visits, must be clearly stated, okay. The experimental aspects of the trial and the possible risks and the reasonable expected benefits should be clearly stated, okay, should be clearly stated. along with the alternative procedures available to the subject if he or she chooses not to take part of the trial. Okay, not to take part of the trial. Okay, so available compensation. Okay, available compensation in the event of injury should be clearly stated. Payment, if necessary, if the subject for participation in the trial should be outlined. Okay, anticipated expenses, if any, should be clearly stated. It should be stated that the subjects involved in the trial is voluntary and of great importance. It should be clear that the subject may withdraw from the trial at any particular time. Okay, at any particular time. And one of the key issues in the modern clinical research is the issue of privacy, right? Is the issue of privacy. So accordingly, it could be clearly stated in the document that the persons who will be granted direct access to the subject's medical information are clearly outlined. Okay, are clearly outlined. Anticipated responses, if any, should be clearly stated, and it should be stated that the subject's involvement in the trial is voluntary. Okay, is voluntary, and also the subject medical information are clearly outlined, and the identification of the individual subjects will be kept confidential. Okay, and the identification of the individual subjects will be kept confidential, and that the subject and or his or her representative will be informed when any new information being available. Okay, when any new information becomes available. Okay, and the name of the person. Okay, the name of the person or persons to contact for further information or for emergency situations should be made available on the document and on a separate piece of paper. Okay, on separate piece of paper if requested by the subject. Okay, in which telephone contact numbers and or email addresses are also should be provided. Okay, also it is important to state any reasons that a subject might be terminated from the trial. Okay, subject must be terminated from the trial. So the expected duration of the trial should be defined. Okay, the expected duration of the trial should be defined, and the approximate number of subjects that will be including in the trial should be outlined. The subject needs to understand and agree that the data collected will be reported and transferred as part of the trial analysis. Okay, as part of the trial analysis, but that the subject will not be uniquely identified, and that his or her data will be used even if the subject withdraws from the trial. Okay, even withdraws from the trial. Okay, so once the informed consent document is signed and the study has progressed, okay, an issue that comes up commonly is document retention. Okay, document retention. So the rules are very clear. A master copy of each version of the informed consent form should be filed. Okay, should be filed along with its approval with the trial documents. The signed, completed informed consent form should be filed with the subject's trial file or medical records as possible. Okay, as possible. Okay, that's most important. And next, the International Conference on Harmonization has legislated that all trial documents must be retained for at least 2 years after the last approval of the marketing applications. Okay, last approval of the marketing applications. So in truth, one should be very reluctant to ever discard or destroy trial documents. Okay, trial documents. If we wish, okay, or if you wish to discard or destroy trial documents, you should seek a discussion about the subject with the sponsor of the trial. Okay, sponsor of the trial. So if we emphasize all these things, okay, first of all, the emphasis is not in the informed consent form. Okay, emphasis is not in the informed consent form, although that is necessary part of the process, but rather in the philosophy behind this. Okay, so we want to have true information being conveyed to the subject so that an autonomous voluntary assessment of the individual's willingness to participate in a trial can be clearly derived and documented. Okay, can be clearly derived as well as document. So that is the most important aspect which we have to review